success or Tim Berners-Lee's success or somebody else, I don't know, but we've gone an awful long way in meeting those objectives over the last 10 years, which has, of course, produced an awful lot of change in the conditions in which the Internet society lives. So the original model we had in 1992 was organizational members paying with no position on the board of trustees. So organizational members means companies and universities. They pay a fairly large sum of money each year, and they have nothing to do with the way the Internet Society is managed, except for the fact that there is an advisory council. And an advisory council can, of course, give advice, and the management can ignore that advice. So really, the organizational members had no power. Individual members who were paying, the final fee level settled down at $35 a year, and the individual members were able to vote in the elections for the Board of Trustees. Just as a matter of interest, how many people here are, in fact, individual members of the Internet Society? Okay, not more than about 10 or 12 people. Our original hope was that everybody who felt themselves to be a professional involved in the Internet would join, because it would become a normal thing to do, just as professional computer scientists join the ACM and professional electronic engineers, at least in the US and many other countries, join the IEEE. Most of the individual members originally were from the technical community, from the IETF, from the NRENs, or from the Internet service providers that were just beginning to emerge in 1992. If you think back to 1992, the acronym ISP would have meant nothing. Nobody would have known what you were talking about if you said ISP in 1992. And then there were 3 trustees, 3 members of the board with veto power over actions of the board. And those 3 trustees were representatives of 3 organizations. I think it was RARE, not TERENA at the time, but never mind. TERENA, CNRI, that's Bob Kahn's non-profit company, and EDUCOM, which doesn't exist anymore. So actually, RARE and EDUCOM both went out of existence. But EDUCOM lasted a bit longer than RARE, I think. It was very important that those trustees had veto power because they could prevent the rest of the board from changing the bylaws and changing the way ISOC operated. So in 1997, there was what was a fairly important change to the governance model. Those 3 charter trustees agreed to give up their seats and their veto power. From that point on, all the trustees were elected by the individual members, and the organization members still had no position on the board. The environment has changed since then. The Internet Society has had many successes. I don't want to go on about the successes because talking about the past is fairly boring, but we had 5 significant challenges. One is that there was constant turnover in the individual membership. People would join for $35, they'd stay 1 year or 2 years, and then they wouldn't renew. And it turned out that with this continuous turnover in the membership, the membership was no longer based in the Internet technical community. That's why it didn't really surprise me, only to see, a dozen hands up in this room, whereas in 1992, probably everybody in such a session would have been an initial member. The advisory council of the organizational members really has had very little influence over the last 10 years. It's not been very strong in terms of producing recommendations, and the board has not really taken much notice of it. The Internet has been very successful, which means there are many other organizations with overlapping missions with the Internet Society. We find very often things we might want to talk about in the public policy area, the Center for Democracy and Technology has got there first, or the EFF has got there first, or Larry Lessig has got there first, right? And there is an organization there as well. It's called the ILPF or something like that, Internet Legal Something Forum. We've had quite a bit of difficulty maintaining financial stability of the Internet Society over the last 3 or 4 years. And, of course, it got a lot worse last year when the dot-com bubble burst, and it got quite tough to collect our revenue. And because of all these changes, basically by 2 years ago, the year 2000, the mission of the Internet Society was no longer very clear. We were wondering what we were there for. The board was wondering what it was there for. Things were a little bit confused, I'd say, at the time when I became chair. Now, just to make it clear, in 2001, 9% of the dollars from membership money was paid by the individual members. 91% of the membership money was paid by the organizational members. In 2001, the voting power for board seats was 100% individual members and 0% organizational members. Now, as people sometimes say in technical presentations, do you see a problem here? I mean, this is what the American Revolution was about. No taxation without representation. So we got to the point where we were more and more concerned that the organizational members, especially given the economic challenges in the industry, were asking very serious questions about why they were paying this money when they had absolutely no control over the membership of the board. And the board membership was not rooted in the technical community anymore because the people who were electing the board membership were not in the technical community. Now, in June 2000, at the board meeting in, some city, can't remember, Yokohama. Yeah, it's hard to remember. All the hotels are the same. So in June 2000 in Yokohama, we defined 4 pillars of activity for the Internet Society: education, standards, public policy, and what we do for the members. Education is, above all, the INET conference. You still have time to go to the INET conference, as long as you don't try to get there from Ireland. You should be okay. Washington, D.C. in 2 weeks' time. NDSS, which is the security symposium, ISOC runs once a year. NTW, or the network training workshops for the developing countries, which have been very, very successful over the last 10 years in training a whole cohort of people in developing countries on how to build out the Internet. ThinkQuest, we were closely associated with ThinkQuest, and other activities of that kind. Standards, as I mentioned, we support the IETF financially to some extent. We fund the RFC editor in particular. And we pay for the insurance policy that means that people like Harald can sleep easy at night. Public policy, we have a modest public policy program which basically consists of making statements and press releases about public policy matters, doing consultancy for people who come to ISOC with questions about public policy issues. And sometime about a year ago, we were granted formal status as a non-governmental organization by UNESCO, which is a bad word in the United States because they don't like UNESCO in the United States. But in fact, it's reasonably important in presenting ISOC as a source of public policy advice that we are recognized by UNESCO. And for the members, the kind of services we provide, of course, the website, member briefings, there are chapters which people can join, and there are special interest groups that people can join. So that's roughly what we do. And we think these activities fit into the lines of the mission that I showed you at the beginning, at least the bits of that mission that have not actually been completed. So defining this mission of the Internet Society in 4 pillars gave us a much clearer view. First of all, we understood our own budget, which for me it was quite a surprise when I joined the board and was elected chair. The budget was sort of one big pot of money, and you couldn't really understand where the money was going. So by splitting the accounting into these 4 pillars, we actually understood our budget much better. we understood the pressure points in the budget as well. We could see the successes and failures, and very specifically, we could find out what the organizational members care about, because we invited organizational members to raise their contributions to a level we call platinum status, with the difference that they could designate the money and say the money is to be used for this specific purpose. Risky business, as Karel, I think, would agree, because
we have a similar debate in today.
yeah. So we did it. But we set the price fairly high. The contribution was fairly substantial to be a platinum member. But this allowed us to understand what most of the organizational members cared about. And they said, what we care about, what we really need, are internet standards, which echoes some of what Larry was saying, actually. We need open standards. We think this is a very important activity. We're very happy that the Internet Society supports the standards effort. It became extremely clear to those of us in the ISOC Executive Committee that the current composition of the board did not reflect either the original technical roots of the Internet Society or the priorities of the people who send us the money every year. When you have that situation, you have to do something about it, because otherwise, the future is relatively limited. Change was unavoidable. The objectives of the change were to correct the imbalance of power, to strengthen the chapters, because we believe the chapters are actually the right way for individual members to participate in something like ISOC. Guarantee connection to the technical community, because it was clear we could not afford to be cut off from the technical community. And achieve an industrial strength board, in quotes, i.e. a board which is able to play a proper part in governing an organization and help us with fundraising, because, to be brutally frank, academics aren't as good at fundraising for this sort of activity as people from industry. And fundraising was clearly a major problem. And we also, unfortunately, had to reduce expenses, because it's clear that as long as the telco industry and the internet industry and the IT industry are all in a downturn, we can't assume the same rate of income we've had for the last 10 years, so we've had to reduce expense. So these are the changes we put in place this year after a very, very lively discussion in the board. Remember, this was the board which was voting to change the way the board is created, thereby reducing the probability that the current board members would get re-elected. So we were asking them to basically give up their jobs. The situation now is, and this is a big change, 6 trustees in a steady state will be elected by the organizational members, by the people who send that 91% of the money. 3 trustees will be elected by the chapters on behalf of the individual members. 3 trustees selected by the IETF. The word is selected, not elected, because we said it's the IETF's business how it chooses its 3 trustees. We also have the right to appoint 2 or 3 trustees. If we find prominent people that we think would be useful to the board, we can simply appoint them. This is going to take 2 more years. So we've gone through the first election under the new rules, which is bringing in 4 trustees from organizational members, 1 trustee from the chapters, and 2 trustees from the IETF. The results were announced the other day. Too late for me to have a slide with the results, but I can tell you that one of the new trustees is in the room. It's Fred Baker, who's at the back, being put in as one of the IETF trustees. I don't think any of the other new ones are in the room, but you never know. Happy side effect of this is we decided individual membership should be free of charge. Since it was costing us more than $35 to service a $35 membership, we decided it was much better to reduce both the fee and the cost to 0. And we've been able, as a result of this and other internal changes, to substantially restructure the budget, cut down our ongoing expenses quite significantly. The ISOC is now actually a very, very lean organization in terms of staff. So that is where we are. We have a strong board which will clarify the mission even further, which will assist in strengthening the chapters, and which will enhance fundraising. And the next stop is the INET 2002 conference. Strangely enough, François Flukiger is a real glutton for punishment, because not only is he running the program committee for this one, but he's also heavily involved in the program committee for that one. So, I think we're going to have an excellent program there as well. So if you have any travel budget left, just click on this URL. And that's basically my update. Do you want to do questions at the end, or?
No, I think let's do questions now. Who has a question for Brian?
Okay, any connection between national ISOC organizations and this one? That's a tricky question, because, you know, Internet Society is actually trademarked, and our logo that you see there is trademarked. So we do get a little bit annoyed if we find an organization using that name, which is not one of our chapters. Now, some of our chapters have chosen to incorporate, in other words, to make themselves separate legal organizations in their own country. Now, that's a perfectly legitimate thing for them to do. If, you know, it may be even required by law in some countries for them to do that. Some of the chapters, I think, are unincorporated organizations. But there are 1 or 2 countries, and I don't want to go into details because that sounds like a polemic, where we have a little bit of difficulty with an organization that claims to be connected to the Internet Society but is not a formally recognized chapter, because it doesn't stick to, you know, our guidelines for what a chapter should be. But I don't think we don't particularly want to end up in court. You know? We just have to try and negotiate these situations. There are two or three cases that I'm aware of. In some countries, there may even be a translation issue, because an organization may have a name in the local language, which, if you translate it into English, is Internet Society. But, you know, they may not be claiming to be anything to do with us. They just happen to be calling themselves something in their local language. So, you know, I think if we worry too much about this, it's a waste of our time. But in a few countries, we do have cases that worry us.
What is the IETF procedure for selecting the trustees?
Well, I don't know. I mean, wearing my ISOC hat, I don't know.
Ask that to the next speaker then.
Yeah. Actually, I'm being slightly unfair. We did ask the IETF through the IAB to inform us of the procedure adopted, and we formally agreed to that procedure. And the procedure this year, because there was very little time, was that the IAB made the selection, and the IESG, the steering group of the IETF, confirmed the selection to avoid any, you know, questions about conflict of interest. Whether they use the same procedure next year or go to a more complex nominating process, I don't know. And maybe Harald will comment on that. But, you know, the IETF is not a voting organization because membership is completely flexible. So it has difficulty going to a pure voting solution to this sort of problem. But I think there's a fair degree of community consensus on the adoption of the process used this year.
Can I ask a question myself?
Of course.
The last bullet point is the next stop. What is your own personal philosophy of where the Internet Society will be going from there? What happens after the next stop?
Well,
and I know the strategic thinking is still going on, as you say there, but maybe you have some private thoughts that you can share with us.
my private thought, but it's not particularly private, I say it to anybody who asks me the question, is that this original idea, which I think was in Vint Cerf's head and Bob Kahn's head, you know, and Larry Landweber and the others who created the Internet Society, was really this idea that it should be an association for internet professionals. You would feel it was just a standard part of your CV to say member of Internet Society. And we haven't achieved that, and I think we should have another shot at that goal. I think now it's clear, after our experience with, very general membership, with the ICANN experience of the at-large membership, and a number of other similar experiences, that these models don't work well. Right? So I think we have to try and find a way to make, being a member of the Internet Society something that everybody in this room would want in their CV because it's part of a normal professional toolkit. I don't know how to get there. It's a challenge. But I think that would be a very useful goal. And then a lot of other things would fall out of that, because if you begin to function in that mode, many of the other things you should do, like what sort of conference you should run, etc., become much more obvious. But that's a very personal hope.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Our next speaker, again, needs very little introduction because also an old friend from European research community who went to work for industry, betrayed us, and is still working for the good of all of us. Harald Alvestrand, who is leading the IETF and who will tell us now what is happening in the IETF right now.
Okay, so I will try to be interesting. I will talk a lot more about technology and a lot less about sociology. I listened to Brian and I listened to Larry Lessig in the other room a little bit earlier, and they said a lot of sensible things. Technology doesn't exist in isolation. And there's a reason why I put up on my technology-oriented talk, which isn't only about technology, the Internet for everyone. But we'll get back to that. Question, how many of you listened to me speaking about the IETF in Antalya last year? Not enough. I have to use the same slides again. We could have skipped 10 slides if everyone had been there. One thing you just saw disappear off the screen was my organizational affiliation. When I'm talking as IETF, I'm talking as Harald Alvestrand, IETF chair, nothing else. So if you want to blame someone for my opinions and saying they are completely stupid and should be refused to be here in the open stage, talk to the IETF and talk to me. Don't talk to my employer, because I haven't asked him whether he agrees or not, so he shouldn't bear the blame either. Let's see. A little bit about what the Internet is kind of an introduction, because that's changing. And it's important to keep at least one eye on that change in order to realize exactly what kind of mess we have gotten us into and what kind of mud we wear on our shoes. A little bit about what the IETF is, and what you probably think of as the meat of the talk, exactly what the IETF has been doing with its process over the last year, and some words on challenges that are important to face up to and worry about just now, just here. Two words about the history of the IETF. A little bit about who relates to what. The IETF is not alone in doing standards for the Internet. And there's a reason why. One reason is that the people of the ISG essentially have to keep control over everything that goes on in the IETF. If we had 10 times as much to do as we have, we would all be crazy instead of only being half crazy. And a little bit about Internet directions and concerns. First, about the Internet. You've seen this picture with a big cloud in the middle, and everyone is sitting on local area networks. What's inside the cloud in the middle is just about totally optics. Don't care about anything else, and you will have a pretty good picture of how the internet actually works. And it's pretty fast networks. I mean, gigabit networks are becoming the norm, at least in the academic sector. And we expect to see terabit networks sometime not too far into the future. But there's not only one network. Remember that. There's no middle to this network. When you're talking about complexity in the middle, you have a real problem implementing it, because there's no middle to have it in. There are many middles and many networks connected to each other. And the access networks to these networks reach out into all parts of society. Government offices, hospitals, universities, private homes. And as the internet grows, into phone systems, planes, and even satellites. That's a lot of places for the internet to go. And it's still only one internet. One place the internet is growing very much is into our houses. The place where you live, learn, and play, where the internet basically gets connected to everything. This is a trend we expect to see accelerating, so that your stereo should be incomplete without an internet connection. And your TV already is. You basically now, today, you see the internet as something that connects to your computer. Tomorrow, the internet will connect to your telephone. Day after tomorrow, who knows where it will go. But when a device has the need to communicate at all, and is already loaded with some degree of electronics, if other problems don't kill us, that connectivity will be provided by internet means. The Internet Engineering Task Force is the historical developer of internet-related protocol. I mean, the guys who created the basic internet protocols really did it before starting an organization to work on it. But once things started getting complex and lots of people were talking to each other, they started meeting, and they started calling the thing that they're creating the Internet Engineering Task Force. And it kind of grew from there. The first IETF meeting fit around one table. We still have IETF meetings that fit inside one hotel. If you don't want to sleep there, of course. And it's a consortium of individuals from lots of places. The basic requirement for participating in the IETF is that you have an email address. We have researchers, we have people from education, network operators, equipment vendors, government regulators, and just plain bystanders. Fundamental working principle of the IETF. We reject kings, presidents, and voting. We believe in rough consensus and running code. That means, among other things, that if it doesn't work, it shouldn't be a standard. And if you can prove that something works, you've got an argument against those who have a theory. My personal abbreviation is pair of facts beats house of supposition. Rough consensus means If everyone agrees, it's fine. It's 51% agree, and the 49% have rational arguments to support their viewpoint. We don't have a conclusion. No voting. It's a bit odd decision-making. The rough consensus part, by the way, is that if you have one last man standing and everyone else agrees that his argument is bogus, we say, okay, we have rough consensus. Shut up. Sometimes very rough. But the process basically works and has produced reasonably competent standards in reasonably short time frames. I mean, other standards organizations have produced standards on very short time frames that have proven to have fatal flaws, and other standards organizations have proved to be able to deliver standards on very long time frames that are then totally irrelevant. We kind of try to find a middle ground. We also produced irrelevant standards on short time frames and relevant standards on long time frames, but we hope those are exceptions. The fundamental perspective of participants in the IETF, the reason lots of organizations pay their employees to go there and say, work, be open, make standards in common, is that not all the bright people in the world work for Cisco yet. There is no one organization who knows it all. And good ideas come from everywhere. And perspectives that help us understand what we really should do come from all over the place. And especially from the people who do not have the same viewpoint. So, when we open the commonality of ideas, when we share what we have, and do the standards work to standardize what's necessary to allow the commons to exist, the IETF works as it should. The big yellow block in the middle of the screen is the Internet. And it contains a lot of stuff, not everything of which is an IETF relevance. Like HTML, the web page format, is dealt with quite competently by the W3C, the World Wide Web Consortium. At least they are doing a much better job of it than we did when we tried it. And we got no real reason to standardize Ethernet because the IEEE is doing a competent job of that. Similarly, Etsy with cellular radios, the ITU with about everything else that transmits bits over wires or fibers or various other things. But there's a lot of stuff left in the middle, and the IETF does most of it. There are some things that it does that are in cooperation with other bodies. But we found that often the best form of cooperation is the stuff where we agree that, okay, you do this part, we do this part. And we've had a reasonably good cooperation with the third generation 3GPP. I can never remember what the P stands for. That deals with the next generation mobile systems, where they have come to us with a long list to say, these are standards that we would like to use. Could you please have them passed as standards by next Tuesday? And we say, well, they were nearly finished anyway. Or, you must be kidding. And that works out fairly well. Sometimes we even manage to deliver them by next Tuesday. Applications, those things that use the Internet, come from all over the place. A lot of them are quite proprietary or quite strange, like Napster or Nutella or Microsoft Word. But those aren't the IETF's bother. Because the IETF provides the infrastructure, the things we need to agree on in order to communicate. Someone commented to me about me using PowerPoint for this, because that's a means of communicating that is not standard. I'm sorry, I'll have to do better. But we tend to use interfaces defined by other bodies instead of inventing stuff just to be different. We hope so, anyway. And feel an overall need to see the whole thing work. And the applications we do are mainly what we call infrastructure applications, such as DNS, the call setup protocols for voice over IP, WinZip, SSH, that position on the slide used to say Telnet, but people who use Telnet and log in using passwords deserve what they get. So I deleted it from the slide and put SSH instead, because that's now an IETF standard. A lot of stuff. The vision we have is that the Internet is a space for people who wish to communicate. The universal interconnect is the user view we want to make visible to the user. On the other hand, we also want to enable the competition of the service provider, which requires the interconnected networks in competition with each other for the customer, while delivering the same service to the user. It's not obvious to all that this is a harmonious picture that will work great in the future, but what the hell? It would use the Internet. I call the Internet the flat space infrastructure. By the time we get to where we are now, we really shouldn't be saying that glorious, glorious, fantastic, hooray, we have a new Internet. It's plumbing. It's getting the bits from one place to another. What's glorious about water mains? Well, those who design them think they're wonderful. But the real glory of the Internet is what we can use it for, what it enables in our day-to-day lives. But it's been quite a strong factor in turning the local economy into a global economy. Geography is an illusion. Unfortunately, geographic-based law is not. But the best minds in the world are on the Internet. And getting them to cooperate is a business of finding them, not about moving them. That's important to know. The social impacts of the Internet and of the IETF is deep in that your local village is now not defined by the people living next to you. It's defined by the people you talk to. Your contacts, not your hometown. It's changed the information models from a model where information is things that are hoarded in stores and you have to go to get it, to a system where information is out there if anyone has cared to publish it. And 10 seconds is a long time. Some people think that's a very unfortunate consequence of the Internet. Some mornings I quite agree with them. But when everyone's on the Internet, the enemy is out there too, for whatever definition of enemy you're using this week. Security, as I said, the stranger is near. And you have to extend trust in order to live and in order to use the Internet effectively. So a lot of what security is about will be risk management. I'll return to this. The things that threaten us, apart from the obvious problems with copyright, are balkanizations. When things are accessible to some but not all, we are starting to split the Internet apart into the haves and the have-nots. or your game and my game. And that's very dangerous for the internet as we know it. And security, the idea that something dangerous is out there, is a threat to the internet itself. So the openness of the internet is being used against us. But it's not so much the danger, but our fear of the danger that is even more damaging. But we need one internet. Now, back to technology. IPv6 is coming. I've said that for 10 years. This time it's true. Yep. Yeah, 8. We took 2 years figuring out which IP it was, so after that it's been IPv6. But there's a real danger that when we stumble into the new network world, that we are creating balkanized networks so that things don't work well together. So a lot of the engineering has to do with interworking, with making sure people on IPv4 networks and people with IPv6 networks can reach the same information if they want to, and the information provider wants to make it available. That communication is a matter of choice, not a matter of technology. We do have a lack of experience with usage of IPv6, especially a heavy usage. Last year I had a point saying that some final details on DNS are still to be worked out. Now I can report that they're done. But we're going to have some real fun figuring out exactly how our most favorite applications work in an IPv6 context. Warning, most of them work fine if you have both IPv4 and IPv6 on your machine. IPv6 doesn't remove any option you already had. But if you want to have IPv6 only boxes like mobile phones, then you might have a problem. I picked up some recent IFCs just to point out that, yes, we are dealing with real issues, and there are a lot of them. But there are other issues. My most favorite one, for some definition of favorite, is the DNS. The technology we suggest for putting strange, bizarre characters into DNS names is now in IETF last call. What is nice about having a fundamentally, well, it would be wrong to say fundamentally flawed technology, but what is nice about having a standardized technology for this is that we know what the problems are. When we didn't have any worked solution, people could claim that the moon was made of green cheese, and we couldn't disprove it. People could claim that if you just do this, then everything will work by magic. And because it wasn't worked out in detail, we couldn't tell. But getting the characters into the DNS is the easy part. Getting them to work properly in applications is the hard one. We had some real fun technical issues this year that I want to point out. SCTP, the Signal and Control Transport Protocol? Stream Control Transport Protocol. It's the first new transport layer on the internet that's been on standards track and seems to be taking off for 28 years since TCP. It's a little bit different than TCP. Shoves records around, can do multi-channel in one congestion controlled channel, can reattach its endpoint connection. We did one mistake when we created it, which was we did the wrong checksum algorithm. And we just approved the RFC that fixes that. The IETF is not perfect. We do mistakes all the time. And one reason why I publish so many RFCs is that we try to fix them. Another interesting property is explicit congestion notification, which is one of our first attempts to do a new mechanism for flow control on the internet. It's a bit odd that it's been so long, but the only way we have of signaling something's wrong in the network is to throw away packets. This might actually be useful. It also uncovered some interesting properties of our current security architectures. Hi, Eric. And because there were new bits set in packets that previously hadn't had those bits set, and some firewalls said, hey, this is strange, I don't trust this, I'll throw it away to be safe. So we managed to get that worked out, but that's something we have to deal with in the future. And of course, we got all this quality of service stuff with diffserv and intserv and security for those and all that. Devil is in the details. It's a tough problem. And of course, we have the GGPP IETF collaboration with those long lists of specifications which says, if you have a new RFC number for this by next Tuesday, it would be most nice. And some of it works out. And part of the time they're listening to us too, which is good. There are really two pieces of the voice over IP thing. One is actually getting the packets with a voice in them through. That's easy. You just set up a connection and fire them. And the other one is agreeing on how to fire the packets and where they're supposed to go, and especially if they should end up in a telephone network at some place, what should we do? That's signaling. We also had a fine quarrel with something called enum, which is a directory of telephone numbers that you can reach on the internet, or maybe cannot reach on the internet. And it's been a most entertaining discussion, if you happen to like that. Well, ask me questions if you want to know more. I'll skip. And of course, the lower layer stuff. We finally got to publish RFC. The RFC is defining MPLS. That was early 2001. And we got a market battle, quote, battle, unquote, between two different ways to tell fibers that this is the way the light is supposed to go. There's some GMPLS, which has nothing to do with MPLS. That is almost ready. And we're still working on what we hope to achieve, what I told you last year that we should achieve. Common control and measurement. One way to control and measure what's going on in your network at the link layer. About fear, or to say other things, security. That particular picture is one pirated copy of probably one of the most famous icons of this century, or this part of this century. Security and law enforcement are sometimes opposites, not friends, which might strike you as strange at sometimes. But the IETF has traditionally gone for providing protection against interference and protection against other people seeing what they are doing. Law enforcement likes that as long as the good guys use it and don't like it when the bad guys use it. So in the old days, there were the crypto export rules. In the new days, there are other issues. But the arguments that we thought that we were finished with had come to the fore again. And to me, the biggest danger here is that we are giving away what we are trying to protect, destroying our security because we want to feel secure. Some people want to make law enforcement easier. Make access to user information easy, really easy. Wiretap, search warrant, net scans. Some people want to outlaw the hiding of information. If it's encrypted, it must be evil. And especially, I have encountered this strange phenomenon in IP telephony. You know, when you have two places that are both on the internet who want to talk telephone with each other, the obvious way to do it to an internet head is tell each one the IP address of the other and start sending packets. If you tell it to a bellhead, a traditional telephone operator, the obvious answer is get the packets from both to a central office, which can decide who it goes to. One of the interesting differences is that in the bellhead case, it's far easier to figure out, for a law enforcement official, to figure out what they're talking about. Centralized solutions are real boon to law enforcement because they're easy to access, they are staffed by reasonably competent people, and they are there. You can figure out where they are. That has a strong effect on how IP telephony is developing, and I don't like it much. And of course, there are some tagalongs. Copyright enforcement schemes. You might win this case, but are you sure you have money enough to pay the lawyers? And this stuff has collateral damage. Open source is based on the premise that it's relatively cheap to get into the software publishing business. In fact, so cheap that you can give it away and still break even. If the first question you get asked if you say, I want to release this software on the internet is, have you made sure you've consulted your lawyer and explained and spent fees to explain to the lawyer exactly what you're doing? Open source doesn't work anymore. That's collateral damage. Now, what does this have to do with standards? Well, standards are about making things easy to cooperate on. And the more things that make trouble for us when we want to cooperate, the more lawyers, documents, and staff handling interesting requests from various law enforcement agencies you have in order to do something, the less you have to talk about. The IETF made a statement a few years ago which is colloquially referred to as the Raven statement, which is, wiretaps don't work. They're not worth the pain to standardize. Not that they're evil or that they're good, but putting them in standards is neither effective, is not effective. The bad guys can get around it. The good guys will get into trouble. This is not effective. But the IETF has required that every single IETF protocol contains security that is appropriate to its environment. Mandatory to implement. If you claim to be conformant to an IETF standard, you're supposed to have an adequate level of security in it. And that does not mean plain text passwords. See, delete you not telling that earlier. So a lot of what we've done is to do it toolkits. Kerberos, SASL, TRS, IPsec, PKX stuff. But tools are only useful if someone uses them for something. So I listed some stuff that we've done here. One of the big things we're doing is to trying to cook up a security model for the DNS, so that when you send a question to the DNS and get back an answer, you can have reasonable confidence that the answer you got back is the answer that a competent authority put into the database. There's absolutely no guarantee from that it's a sensible answer, but it should be a competent authority. We have a lot of interesting discussions where we down into the question of how many gigabytes of RAM do we have to buy for this particular service in order to implement these protocols. That's going into details. One of the things we have to do is to not hide things away. An IETF tradition is open, frank discussion of security issues. Exactly what some people claim is a violation of the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. One of the Russian programmer got arrested for having, among other things, published information on the internet that a particularly unbreakable protocol consisted of the ROT13 algorithm. The web page of the company claimed it was unbreakable, but revealing the fact that it was quite idiotically simple to break was apparently illegal. So he got arrested. Well, there was a little more to the Skularov case than that, but that's part of it. We want to make our best tools available. Make tools that we know work and make them available to people. One big problem we have is with patents. Patents of the class that say, this particular method, you can license them for me for $10,000. And by the way, if you choose any of the 10 other alternatives that might be uncovered and might be not, you have to spend $10,000 talking to my lawyers before you can do that. Because I think, I don't know, but I think my patents cover that too. That's a real painful thing in the IETF just now. But we also have a what do you call it? We have to make things easy for the user when he operates in a reasonably secure fashion. Because now that every device that communicates is on the internet, and every device on the internet has to have some security, damn it, the users of those devices are not IT professionals. You say to them, now you have to set up the public key, and they say, That's one reason why passwords are still so popular. People understand it. But we have to have standard tools in order to get anywhere. Conclusion. We want one and only one Internet. You see a T-shirt of Internet 2? No thanks, I've already got one. And we want a flat Internet where everyone can work to the fullest of their potential and figure out the new things and new opportunities. Because we believe that global communication enhances business, it enhances trade, enhances research, and enhances friendship. Interpersonal communication and using the Internet to communicate is a tool that can improve the condition of man on Earth. That's a big statement. Opportunities and challenges belong together. In some languages, it's like one word. We need IPv6 because we need more addresses on the network so that we can keep a flat internet where everyone can publish if they want to. We have to do internationalization to make the internet usable in all communities, not just those that can figure out the difference between a 1 and an L. We have to have appropriate and useful security on the internet in order to succeed. And it's our network, and we're responsible for it.
Questions? Ooh. Yeah?
Harald, I'm going to take you up to layer 8, I'm afraid. If you were advising someone who was trying to create a standards body somewhat modeled on the IETF, a new one for some slightly new purpose, what mistakes would you advise them to avoid?
That's the interesting question. One of the things we have seen in other organizations is that there's a tendency towards rule-making, towards making complex rules for things so that we aren't depending on exactly what people are filling the chairs. I think one part of the success of the IETF is that we avoided that. We looked into the eye of the fact that if we select stupid people to rule us, we'll be gone. And said, okay, that's fine. So the biggest challenge, I think, of setting up a new organization is to find the right people to start with. I don't know what I would have done different with the IETF. A couple of things we have to do in order to, because we're in this day and age, are to have a clear position on what our IPR rules are. That means anything to deal with patents and copyrights. In the next IETF meeting in Yokohama, we have a meeting on Friday where I have given orders not to schedule any other meeting against this because there are so many people who express a point of view on this matter that I want them to have lots of time to beat up on each other. To clarify the way the IETF works, I think the IETF is doing fairly well in IPR, but it has not been clear enough about it. It's not possible to understand how the IETF works with IPR from its written documents. And so that's one thing we have to do. That's about the two most obvious ones. Good people and clear statements.
Another question. Talking about selecting good people, you still owe us an answer how you're going to appoint members of the Board of Trustees of the Internet Society.
Well, we've done so. The two appointees are Fred Baker and Eric Hauser. I think they're good people. And the way we picked them was that the IAB, which is the organization in charge of most external relationships from the IETF, got together and started thinking, sent out a public call for nominations to the community, got about 10, 15 names, looked at the names and said, Fred, please leave the room. He was a member of the IB. So the IB, minus Fred, discussed the matter for a while and came up with this particular suggestion. And the ISG looked at what the IAB came up with and said, okay, that's fine. So that's how we did it this time. I mean, a few of the guiding principles of the IETF is don't do anything in secret if you can help it. So we asked the community, what people do you think are suitable for representing us? We had of 10 suggestions, about 5 were really good people. So it was just a matter of finding out which particular were the best ones. So that's an answer. It worked. We got people. Next time, we don't know whether we do it this way or do it with a NAMCOM work. But that's a discussion that the IB will certainly have. More questions?
No more questions. Thank you once again, Harald. We move to our last presentation, going from a worldwide perspective to a European perspective, where the European Union or the European Commission, depends on the background what you like to say. I think it's the European Union, an important player, not only in providing money, so much of what the European Research Network community is doing, but also in developing more general policies for the information society, in which we would like to think that the European Research Networking community can play an important role. Like the previous two speakers, Roman Tirler is somebody with roots in the European Research Networking community, and he ended up working for the European Commission, so he's well placed to tell us about it.
Thank you, Karel. Good afternoon. I have now the boring task after these interesting presentations to present you something you probably expect. It must be slightly bureaucratic. So you know all research at the EU level is done via framework programs. We are now at the end of the 5th framework program and moving towards the 6th. So this is more or less the outline I will present. First, a few words about ERA. That's the European Research Area. That's the basis of the new framework program. Then, especially IST, that's the Information Society Technology Program. In FP6, that's probably of most interest here. And then there is a new initiative, eEurope 2005, we just mentioned that shortly. So just a few words you can read. This is the political context of what we are doing. Normally the framework programs are defined in the treaties and with several articles that you will see later on. And this is also the political context. And this is very important because the European Research Area was invented or defined by Commissioner Biscard, who has the DG, the research, let me say more or less European Research Ministry, saying that we have to go away from fragmented research in Europe and try to find and make critical mass. So this is more or less a picture of the ERA context. In the middle you have this new concept. Around you see FP6, because when we discussed FP6, the question was even at the beginning not to name this framework program 6, just give another name to mark the difference going from the 5th to the 6th framework program. So now to the more real things. This is the Commission proposal for the 6th framework program lasting from 2002 to 2006. So now if you look at the parts that are interesting for us, here we have the Information Society Technologies, where presently, for example, GEAN and GRID is funded. And then you have some other areas where funding will come mainly for the GRID and research networking. Now, this is really the latest update you can see. Now we have for IST 3.625 million euros, of which 100 million are for GEAN and GRID. And you see down there research networking, research infrastructures. We have other 200 million for GEAN and GRID. So this looks on the picture quite nice, but it may be a nightmare for the management. Coming from the two different because directions, even if there is a general agreement now that the budget, for example, for grid, the total of 300 millions will be managed by the IST program. That's definitely agreed by Commissioner Busquin. Now, this is just a short overview how long it takes to make a framework program. You see we are now here, where is the blue arrow, and we are in a real good shape because last week the Council finally agreed to 162 amendments. I think today was another reading, what is called a reading A, that means that's just presented and it will be adopted. And on the 13th, if I remember, at least very soon, that will be the next reading and acceptance by the Parliament, and then probably things could go very, very fast. Very fast, that would mean for us, we would have the first calls in December or even in November for the next framework, framework program. Now, a little bit more detail. I don't want you to understand all this, what is on this slide. This is a change from the IST program as it was in the 5th framework program. You see ideas behind were more or less saying we have done enough technology or pure technology in the 5th framework program, and it's not enough just to make technology. You have to bring the technology closer to the users, and for this our high-level advisory group has invented a very beautiful name called ambient intelligence. Some people call it pervasive and so on. But it's really important. That means that we should more think to put the user in the center and not just produce technology that is, at the end, not very helpful. And you can see it also for what was done, for example, in 3G, 4G, and all that. And so this was not really something, because the services did not take up. So we have much more to think in services than in pure technology. And this is reflected in this picture. For example, now for people who are interested in research networking and grids, this is mainly in here. The research networking part will be in.
Laser pointed.
Okay. You see, the grid part will be in there, and more or less the pure networking part will be in there. But this is probably a very big simplification. I will explain that later on, because for all what we consider research, we have, as you will see, very well-defined instruments. An instrument is a means to implement the program. That means it's more or less how the contracts will be made, etc. Now, the contracts for research projects are very well defined. But for infrastructure, we have still to invent another means to fund it, because this is not foreseen in the present, let me say, definition of the instruments. So there are still discussions on that. So that's the reason this is still maybe not quite clear where they will be, really. Okay, now, just to go to 6th framework program, I said it already at the beginning. The 6th will be a considerable change. It's not business as usual. We say that going from the 5th to the 6th. So there is a new concept coming up, going from the project thinking. We had in the 5th framework program more or less 20,000 projects in the whole framework program, not in IST only. And there was the tendency to see we have to concentrate and see where is European strength. And as you can see here, we have to develop new approaches, not just fund as it was done in the 5th, very interesting research, but that did not really give us products or made Europe more competitive. And now this is also purely bureaucratic way. This is, as you will see in the next few slides, the most important instruments, how calls for proposal will have to be done, how evaluation has to be done, how the management of the projects will be done, will be quite different. Now, these are the famous, as I mentioned before, 6 instruments how research proposals will be funded in the 6th Framework Program. Here again, I will address more or less the first 2 because they are new. And as I said before, the first is called Integrated Project. This is really something that's totally different and it's objective-driven. It should really be more or less driven by big players or by industry. You'll see that later on. Then we have these networks of excellence. They are, for people who know about our EU bureaucracy, they are not thematic networks. They are totally different from thematic networks in the 5th Framework Program, and they are more or less exploratory research or fundamental research. Then this is something what I mentioned, not mentioned before, but I said this, why this strange name? This is the name in the Treaty of Amsterdam, and this means this is member states could decide to make an initiative for a collaboration with the Commission or with the framework programs. Then this so-called targeted research initiatives, as you can see, the Commission is good in inventing new names. This is the name for the old contracts and instruments. And then we have these coordination actions and support actions that they are not that different from what existed before. Now, here you have the main principles, as I said before, why these new instruments. We decided we need a considerable simplification and streamlining, and I think anybody who has submitted projects to the Commission will agree on that. I don't know if that will be achieved, no? Especially to speed up procedures, how time to contract and similar things. No? We need also much more flexibility and adaptability. Also, this was not the case presently. And what is important here to note is increased management autonomy. This is a very difficult task because this will mean for integrated projects, the proposers will have much more responsibility. They will be better paid for that, certainly, but they will have to be audited and they will have a much greater responsibility. Of course, now is the famous last point here is this is public money. We have to assure that this is done in the proper way and so on. Now a bit more to the concept of the integrated project. As I said before, this is designed to support research that is objective and result-driven, with clearly defined objectives and results. Each IP should integrate all the types of activities needed to attain the goals, integrate the critical mass, I will define that later on, of resources needed to obtain the goals, integrate all elements of technology chain to attain impact of the goals, support industry, academia, collaboration among SMEs. This is the poor definition. I have to stick to this definition because, as you see later on, I will give you all the URLs where you can read the long and complex texts that are behind these abstract words here. What are typical activities in an integrated project? They may cover full research spectrum. For example, an integrated project that does not have a strong research component, that may be an interesting activity, will not be accepted. And what we really want in an integrated project that it covers not just, let me say, in OSI terms, the lower layers, it must cover the whole chain. And that's the reason also what is here important to see. It's not just this part here, it's also technology transfer, training activities, dissemination activities. And the project should also be done that in a coherent way. I shall say here also, you have to understand an integrated project is not more money, more participants, and so on. It's different in concept. This I will more or less skip that because unfortunately this is not completely defined. I will mention just a few words. The funding scheme will be different. There will be a grant for every year, not like in the previous projects where you got an advance and then you had to submit the cost statements to get additional money and so on. Yeah. you see, annually each participant has to provide the statement, and then it will be paid. This will be simplified. But this is, I think, very, very, very provisional, and we have to see if this is agreed. There are presently working groups still deciding how this will be finally done. Now let's move quickly to the network of excellence. Network of excellence are complementary to the IP projects. They, as I said before already, are more for the fundamental research, and also the whole funding scheme, as you will see later on, is completely different. No? And again, as you can see here, what is important is to get the critical mass of resources and expertise together. For example, one could think of starting a network of excellence that later on becomes an integrated project. And what I shall say, going backwards for the IP, what is maybe interesting, what I did not mention is integrated projects can go up to several tens of millions of euros. There is no lower limit presently. If it depends really on the interest of the community and the quality of the project. Integrated network of excellence, because I mentioned here, financed up to several millions a year. The maximum presently foreseen is 5 million for a network of excellence. Now, this here you can again see the objectives. It's really, as I said before, always to try really get the best people in Europe together, so to enforce really excellence and to progress knowledge on a particular theme and to act as a virtual center of excellence. This is more or less, I'm repeating something before, but I should mention here the one important point. Every network of excellence has to define what is called a joint program activity, and this I will define that in the next slide. This is really have to be seen as a rethought RTD activities of participants, coordinated as one RTD program, not as a project, less redundancy and good coverage. And it has to integrate, for example, all software libraries, common development platforms, exchange of researchers, knowledge sharing, and IPR. And dissemination and training is very important, and also technology transfer. And dissemination is especially important because, as I said before, network of excellence should or could lead to very interesting integrated projects. Financial, same remark as before. I will not go into details because this is not defined. If you want the details, we will give you all the URLs that you will find in where you can find all the information that's on Corvis and so on. Now, this is a new instrument, as I said before. This is this famous Article 169. The name comes from the treaty, and it enables the community to participate in joint implementation of national research programs. Now I tell you immediately, sounds very interesting, but will be very, very difficult knowing our bureaucracy, how this could possibly be implemented. Going back now to the old instruments, these were the contracts we had in the 5th framework program. They remain more or less unchanged, and they should also work as a transition before people are able to propose a network of excellence or an integrated project. They could be used, for example, for doing a roadmap for an integrated project or a network of excellence. Because the problem that comes up very often is that people say preparing a network of excellence is, or an integrated project is very, very expensive. So how shall we do that? We are not paid, especially small and medium enterprises, they cannot do it. So what we could propose then, they could make one of these targeted research projects. There may be calls in the first call of the end of this year, and they can make a proposal for doing a roadmap where they do all the necessary desk research, and then in another call they could propose a real thought-through network of excellence or integrated project. And by the way, I should mention there was a call for expression of interest that ends for integrated projects and networks of excellence. Unfortunately, the deadline is the 7th of June. But even if you did not manage to submit a proposal for that, it's not over. The door is not closed. If you're interested in IDs, this is still possible. And what we will do with these expressions of interest, they will be used for preparing the next work program. In that context, I shall mention also that we organized a set of workshops. You can find them all on the web. For the preparation of the 6th framework program, we had internally work that was called the internal reflection groups. We had 11 of them, and each of these reflection groups produced a report. All this material is on the web, and all this material, together with the workshops we lately organized, are input for the first work program of the 6th framework program. Now, these are the specific coordination actions. I will leave it here. This is something that was clear or used before for people who did submit proposals. They are unchanged. They have the same type of contract, and there is nothing new about that. I shall just say that this type of instruments, this is targeted research projects, will be phased out probably by 2004. What may be interesting on these targeted research projects, they may be used, or one of these instruments may partly be used for funding GEAN. Because GEAN, as I said before, is a different object. GEAN is not really research, it's funding infrastructure. And the instruments we have or had at the Commission, everyone who was involved in that business knows how difficult it is to adapt our contracts to fund infrastructure. So now a bit about the participation. There are many people maybe from countries that do not belong to the European Union, so who can participate. This is quite clear here, as you see here in the integrated projects. Let me say the most important point is here. You see you have to have 2 people from member state, and 1 can be an associated state, and in the others is more or less, the old instruments is simpler. There you can have the same structure as before. No? But the important thing is to know all the associated states, that means former Soviet Union, etc., they can participate. There are also institutions like ESA or CERN, they are agreed to participate. And there are also other institutions or countries like Norway or Israel who have a science and technology agreement with the Union. So just a few words about Europe 2005. You remember we had Europe 2002. These are complementary programs, more linking, let me say, the research activities to policy objectives, so that that everything, or not everything, but the things that have been achieved in research go really over to the users, to people who need them. For example, that all the developments we do, I take an example of e-government here, or e-health. So we had a lot of work done on smart cards, for example. This should be reused in these initiatives. And this is the Commission now had accepted and adopted this new proposal. It's on the web, you can read it. And there was quite some fight because we had added much more and more interesting stuff to these. But presently you will find just this kind of stuff in there. And now this went through the inter-service consultation of the Commission. Now I think on the 21st and 22nd there is a summit in Seville, and then the summit, the European summit, the European member states will decide if they will adopt this communication or not. That is also in that thing I should mention maybe on this part is something that has been proposed. This is a cyber task force, and also I think reinforcement of computer security emergency response teams, and Karel is well aware of that. We did quite some important work on that. So I think that's more or less all I want to say. Here you have all the URLs where you find additional information, especially, as I said before, I could not go in all to the details of the instruments. They are very complex, but you should really, if you intend to submit a project, a proposal, read the text there. Some of the documents are quite readable. Some documents are more or less difficult, but you can always ask, and for information, I am here all the week, so if you need more information on that, please don't hesitate to contact me. Thank you.
Questions? Yes, Steve.
Yes. There is a science and technology agreement between Canada and the EU.
Yes.
Does that mean that EU money is available to Canadian entities in the joint projects?
It depends on the agreement. I would have to see the text now. Because, for example, you have different science and technology agreements. One is the US, for example, that the US pays always their part. We have one with Switzerland, for example, where up to now Switzerland pays the other part. But we have agreements, for example, with Israel. They pay into the framework program. No? So they get also the 100% payment for research communities and 50% for industry. No? I should have to see how exact the text is with Canada. But we have collaborations with Canada, I know.
Yes, because in the fifth program, there was a big debate whether or not it could be funding or not.
Yeah.
Other questions? I have a question. I got all sorts of emails on Friday from people congratulating me because there
Good.
had been something in the newspaper about, I think it was eEurope, that was announced by the commissioner. And as usual, the newspapers garbled it all up, but it was something that the European Commission was going to put a lot of money in the internet infrastructure. Can you clarify what they mean about that investment in fiber rolling out all over Europe, especially accession states?
The only thing, I'm not precisely, the only thing I may say is that the former TEN Telecom, you know, that funded some of this, or the whole principle of the TENs, the Trans-European networks, they were funding infrastructure and similar things. No? The TEN Telecom was now renamed as E10, but I tried to get more information on Friday before I left, but I cannot give you any definite answer on that. But it's certainly nothing to do with the framework program. As you know, by the way...
Maybe it has to do with the eEurope 2005.
No, Europe 2005, this is... I shall say that as Europe 2005, they were fighting for a budget. No? But I think that will not happen.
No huge sums of money in Europe 2005.
No, probably not at all, as it looks like now. And I had a slide, but I wanted to be short. If I would have known they have more time. It's like that you see three groups in there. There is IST, money from IST, from the IST program, money from TEN Telecom, or E10 now, and then is IDA. This is the interchange of data between administrations. This is DG Enterprise, and but the budget is not defined. But they were really fighting because, in principle, George Midakides was supposed to head this activity, and they were long discussions. But if you look now at the text that will be presented as a communication in Seville, There is nothing about the budget. And this is a very, very complicated process because, for example, the framework program we know now. But there is the money that will be allocated. Now the fights will be start. How? The different directorates will get the money. But outside that, it's nearly impossible to get money. It's a very long process. It's a very, very long process. Yeah.